We've lost many kinds of steam locomotives over the years. I think the vast majority of you are well aware of that. Whether it be in America, the UK, Australia, and, well, honestly, everywhere, there's plenty of extinct locomotives. And we just don't have any more. They're long gone, never to be seen again. But, you fools, we can bring them back from the dead. We have the power of unspeakable, mad science to create what has once been lost. And, well, that's happened. This isn't the first time it's happened, but it is one of the more recent times it has happened, and it's over in the UK. Now, the UK has been a pretty good example of preservation. Sure, they have plenty of extinct classes of locomotives on their own, but compared to a lot of other places, they've managed to save quite a few. The preservation community in the UK is insanely passionate, and has done a fantastic job of restoring many steam locomotives, saving them from scrap, bringing them back into operation. But one such steam locomotive was thought lost for many years, until, quite recently, the Bluebell Railway changed all of that. The locomotive class in question is the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway H2 class. These were 442 Atlantic-type steam locomotives, which is actually one of my favorite types of steam engine. The Atlantics had their day, but were largely superseded, especially in the UK, by the Pacific type, and here in America, well, we had even bigger ones like Northerns. The 442 reel arrangement just didn't last particularly long and didn't have the driving potential as trains got bigger and longer. But in the early 1900s especially, they definitely had their place, and did solid work. Here in America, Milwaukee Road used the wheel arrangement for their fast express passenger trains, the Hiawatha's, and then scrapped all of those locomotives, because of course they did. Okay. Anyway, in terms of the H2s, well, they were constructed by Brighton Railway Works, and came into service between June of 1911 and January of 1912. D.E. Marsh is partially credited with them, but they were mostly handled by his assistant at the time, Lawson Billington, because Marsh was on a leave of absence due to sickness, and Billington was given the authority to construct a further 6 442 Atlantics that the railway needed, and would be very similar to Marsh's H1 class. The main difference between the H2s and the H1s is that the H2s incorporated a Schmidt superheater. A superheater has been brought up on this channel before, but in case you don't know what it is, it's a device used to convert saturated steam or wet steam into superheated steam or dry steam. This can be highly beneficial to steam locomotive operation for reasons I think are abundantly clear, and the idea was to basically make the already pretty good H1s even better. Billington did a great job with the H2s. They were an immediate success, having very few teething problems and serving faithfully for many years. They were tasked with express passenger trains, Brighton Limited and the Southern Belle, the latter of which being described by the railway as the most luxurious train in the world. That probably isn't quite true, but it was very nice, so hey, maybe it was. But over time, they fell somewhat out of favor, because they were Atlantics, and locomotive technology was drastically improving. They were replaced completely on the express trains by 1926 by both the King Arthur and the River classes, which were 460s and 264s respectively. But it wasn't that the H2s were going to be useless after this. I mean, they still had plenty of work to do, just not on the express passenger service, particularly boat trains that connected with the New Haven Dieppe ferry service. Dieppe? Dieppe? I feel like this is one of those pronunciations that's going to be corrected on me in the future. Very quickly, actually. But, you know, you know what I meant, okay? It was also about that time that they established their own naming convention. Generally with British locomotives, entire classes will be named off of some kind of theme. In the H2's case, it was named after local geographical features of the southern coast. In total, there were 6 original H2s produced. 5 of them in 1911 and 1 in 1912. South Foreland, North Foreland, The Needles, Beachy Head, Trevose Head, and St. Albans Head. There also were attempts to update them over time. By the late 30s, by this time under the Southern Railway, Oliver bullied was looking at them, and decided a beneficial change would be to increase their typical boiler pressure from 170 psi to 200 psi. And oddly enough, the H2s were one of very few locomotive types that saw a decrease in work during World War II. Now, that doesn't seem to make much sense because, well, weren't the railways in the UK on overdrive because, you know, war? And yes, but they could really only be used for those boat trains. And ferries across the English Channel were completely cut off after 1940 because bombs, and guns, and death, and no. And since they couldn't really be used for anything else, as they'd been displaced in other jobs by more powerful locomotives, a lot of them were put into storage, or sometimes found more miscellaneous duties in southern England, trying to do something, but not very much. Once the war was over, though, they did return to their boat train duties, and did that job faithfully into British Rail, because, listen, you knew they were going to come up, okay, let's just accept it and move on. That wasn't till the late 50s. Obviously, British Rail would start up their modernization plan, and a big part of that was getting rid of all the steam locomotives. Actually, that was arguably the main part of it. As a direct result, the H2s were put on the chopping block. Now, you'd think logically, because they are an Atlantic, they are a bit distinctive because of that. In fact, through my research, I've discovered that there are very few Atlantic steam locomotives preserved over in the UK. A total of 3, to be precise. None of them, however, are H2s. One of them was withdrawn as early as 1949, but the remaining sisters kept trucking on until 1956. The very last member of the class, Beachy Head, British Rail number 32424, stuck around until April of 1958, and was sadly cut up for scrap, leaving no survivors. But the Bluebell Railway would change all that. Now, the Bluebell Railway has their own history, and officially the lines date back all the way to August 1st, 1882, but the line would close on March 17th, 1958. But it was reopened again in 1960 as a heritage railway, and it is the first preserved standard-gauge steam-operated passenger railway in the world to operate a public service. They've been pretty successful in that capacity over the years, partially spurred by the Thomas the Tank Engine series, as Reverend W. Awdry added the character Stepney, who is from the Bluebell Railway in canon. And his basis is Stepney from the Bluebell Railway. It's quite literal, but it was just one more method of promotion, as Awdry was a big proponent of preservation, and the Bluebell Railway has done solid work over the years, all things considered. The thing about them, though, is that they kind of had a partial relationship with the H2. See, to begin with, Beachy Head was utilized on Bluebell's trackage during the 1950s for little heritage runs, basically goodbye tours, and she was actually the very last Atlantic locomotive running in British Rail's service. It was thought logically that she'd be preserved as there weren't many Atlantics left, and you'd think they'd care about that because they're surrounded by the friggin' ocean, and she had done those tours, but no, she was put to the torch. This act spurred Brighton enthusiasts to realize that they probably should do something about this, otherwise all the steam engines, or at least most of them, were going to be gone. They'd already lost Beachy Head, but they could still save more, and they did. It pushed them to have the very first meeting of what would become the Bluebell Railway Preservation Society in 1959. So Beachy Head's death, as well as the whole of the H2s, was directly related to saving a bunch of other steam engines, as well as that whole rail line. They owed it to them, and talk of bringing the type back was entertained, but they just didn't have the money for it. That wasn't until a very, very just phenomenal discovery. See, in 1986, inside a factory in Essex, an ex-Great Northern Railway Atlantic-type boiler was found. That particular boiler wasn't from the H2s, but it was basically identical to the one that they used on the H2s. And the thing about this boiler is that it was in amazing condition. It was pristine, especially for one that had just been sitting around for that long. And a boiler is arguably the most expensive part of a steam locomotive. I mean, the running gear and everything else is pretty expensive too, but boilers are a pain in the butt. Especially building one in the modern day, now that steam's fallen out of favor. But they had a perfectly good one sitting here, and they got a hold of it, and were like, we can do this. We can rebuild her. We have the technology! But even with the boiler, that was going to be a tall order. Again, it was still going to be expensive and time-consuming, but it was something they really wanted to do. In a way, they owed it to the H2s, and Beachy Head, for their existence at all. It seems only fitting that they revive them and give them a little sister. And that's exactly what they did. On October 29th, 2000, they announced their intention to reconstruct a replica wearing the name of the very last one, Beachy Head. They'd managed to scrounge together a whole bunch of surviving components from the engines as well, on top of that boiler, meaning that they had all these spare parts. These bits and pieces, and we can combine them, put them together, like true mad scientists, and recreate history! The boiler would be officially tested in August of 2018, and on March 5th, 2024, just a little over a year ago, the brand new baby of the H2 family rolled out. She could be described as a happy little engine, and her wheel arrangement certainly makes her unique. At least one of the other surviving Atlantics has been run before in heritage service, but not at the moment. And in fact, I think she is the only operational Atlantic in the UK at all, with the others all taken care of, but on static display. That makes her a distinct draw, and it's actually a pretty wholesome story. I mean, we're talking about a class of locomotive that was completely annihilated. They were gone for decades. And Bluebell was like, no! We're going to correct this! And they did. They brought them back. And now she's one of a kind, being the only example of her type in the world, obviously, because, well, they were extinct. But no longer. And it is possible to acknowledge her as a modern rebuild without saying, oh, she's just a copy. No, she is special. She's just a late bloomer, a new baby in the modern day. And we like her. Everyone likes her, okay? You be nice to her, alright? I'm sure they are. I'm sure the Bluebell Railway is thrilled to have her up and running. It would have cost them a great deal of time and effort, but they pulled it off, and should be proud of this achievement. There are some other projects like this in the world. Like I said, it's not even the first in the UK. I love these kind of projects, because we've lost so much, but we do have the ability to bring it back. It's not like these things weren't stuff we haven't built. I mean, we did build them. That was like the whole thing. These are humanity's creations. It's part of our history. Even though the originals may be gone, it is possible to put the past back together, to put the pieces back together, to have an example of these older designs in the present. Go visit her if you haven't gotten the chance. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.